I know we're coming up on some time here, but looking at chapter 3, there were a few articles in here, not a crazy amount, but there was a good number. You remember the foul ball one? The foul ball one dealing with the minor league stadium? Do you remember what the significance of that was? Go ahead, Noel.
Was it talking about like on the back of the ticket?
On the back of the ticket.
Like it was saying like stuff that you should know, like you're gonna get hurt or something. We're not gonna be like liable.
We're not going to be liable if you get hurt. And we had talked about how they actually had several things that were in that fine print that nobody looks at, but you accepted the terms of the ticket when you handed that ticket or had it scanned and you entered the ball yard. So if the woman got hit with the foul ball, had to have a number of surgeries, it was a significant amount of damage to her face. Bottom line was she couldn't get any legal satisfaction or money from the minor league team. Why? Or yeah, what's I believe the minor league team, because ultimately she accepted the terms. And not only did it say you can't be held liable, but it also, I believe, said that they could use any images of you, you know, all sorts of different things. Go ahead, Jake.
In this article, I remember we talked about it, did they try and like expand the nets and then people didn't want to do that? Was that in this article?
That would have been around this article. Some people have actually, they did expand nets. And Major League Baseball, some people have actually said that they want to expand the nets from home plate all the way down to the foul poles out in the outfield. But they're not doing that. And the idea basically is that people are like, hey, I pay money for these big seats because I do want the ability to be able to get a ball. So yeah, that was part of this one. Workers' comp, this I believe was the Greensboro, North Carolina case. Go ahead.
This was the one where the boss the boss and the boss's wife kidnapped the two workers and forced them into a car, drove them on a high-speed chase, and then got into a crash. Then the workers escaped.
Yeah, this was from the Safe Light Auto Glass Company, if you remember. So the husband was the manager. Excuse me, and the wife thought that he was having an affair with one of his associates. So the wife went in there, and there was a bat, and there was a gun involved between the wife and the husband, and they kidnapped two associates, one that she thought was having an affair with his husband. They went on a high-speed chase, had an accident, and that's how the two women were able to get out of the trunk, and they were injured on this. And the husband and the wife, they both had to do significant jail time after this. So they wanted damages, and they wanted to sue Safe Light. But were they allowed to sue Safe Light?
No.
Why?
Because they weren't in a work environment.
They weren't in a work environment. These injuries did not happen as a result of them doing their job, and they didn't happen on the site of the business. Were they able to get workers' comp?
One turned down the offer, the other one turned down the offer, and then went to court to sue, and then the court ruled against her.
Yeah, so the second woman really didn't get any satisfaction at all. So they were not going to get the satisfaction with workers' comp as well because they weren't on site and it wasn't job-related duty. So they were not able to get damages. Of course, if you sue for damages, you know, somebody's going to have to pay, but they were in jail. You know, and it didn't happen on the grounds of the company, so they couldn't sue the company at that point. And then, obviously, the injuries, the one woman took the settlement, the other one tried to go further, and she did not get anything out of it. Terrence, go ahead.
And the husband and the wife pleaded guilty, and they served time in prison because of the incident.
They did. Zoom in on Terrence. The pill, do y'all remember the pill? Go ahead. No.
Yeah, I think this was the one about like how schools were like providing like Plan B pills or like birth control.
No, birth control in school too.
Yeah, but like the parents needed to sign a form, but we talked about like how some kids might like do the signatures themselves, since like some people actually do that, and then we also talked about how that could be an overreach, or like the school is acting like a parent. So, like, taking over the responsibility of
I think this was the one where we talked to Catherine, and I believe Catherine had said that if she was a mother, she would want to know if her teenage daughter was getting birth control from the school. And if you remember on this, they would send a form home. So you would have to opt in and get the parent's signature. And when the parent signed the form, that meant that the school could work independently with the student and they didn't have to tell the parents anything. And to be honest, there would be some parents, like you were saying, that the form might be forged or whatever. They would never have known that this form was there, and then they would have never known that the children were actually receiving these kinds of services. So keep this in mind. And you notice up here, you see some of the ages, 14 or 15 years old. I mean, if they're 17 or 18, maybe it's one thing. If they're 14 or 15, it might be something very different dependent upon the parents. But again, this was one of these experiments. And this actually could be an example of NIMBY. You remember legislative prayer, I believe this one was Greece, New York? And make sure that you're comfortable with this one. The idea that they wanted to pray before some of the local government meetings. Did the Supreme Court say it was legal or not?
Yes, they didn't force the religion on.
Didn't force religion on people. What else?
It's legal and because I don't know, something about it's called the town's constitution was older than the
Yeah, now that's actually true. Well, one of the arguments on this was this government had been around longer than the Constitution, so maybe they should be allowed to do this. Maybe the local community should be able to pick what they wanted to do as far as prayer or not prayer. Go ahead.
Also that by preaching they couldn't try to convert others, and they couldn't also intimidate them by saying things like you're going to hell.
Yeah, you couldn't threaten damnation, you couldn't try and coerce, and you couldn't try and convert either. Make sure that you're comfortable with these, and the Supreme Court said it was legal. And I think the other part about this that was a little questionable was the justices that were the Catholics basically composed the majority. And one of the arguments was, well, the majority might be Christian today, but does that mean that in the future, if it's not a Christian majority, that could also be imposed on a community as well? Or, you remember what one of the other arguments was why this should not be allowed? Because they mentioned an atheist person and a Jewish person going to the meetings. Go ahead.
You mean about the tradition issue, that tradition can change?
The argument as far as why these people should not be required to...
I was saying about the moral problems that they may have in the community because they don't do as the religion of others.
And then how would that impact the government?
They would probably change their business to other places.
Well, the logic was that if we saw that you weren't praying as somebody that was Jewish or atheist, you might not get what you came to the government to get, which could potentially lead to changes in the business. Metro exposure, just really quick, I'm not going to put this one on camera, but you remember all of the examples of public masturbation and nudity that the guy was dealing with. Make sure that you're comfortable with this, and were they able to ban him from the Metro? No, they were not. You could try and get a stay order, but it wasn't very likely. What about if you had a cup of urine poured on you? Terrence is still smiling. Zoom in on him, Rod.
The only reason the Metro bus operator was assaulted by a couple of years because a passenger got really angry because she missed her stop, and it was caught on videotape.
Well, I don't remember the videotape part. You were just caught on videotape. But go ahead.
I'm just confused. What's a stay order?
Stay order is basically you've got to go to a judge, and you would have to get an order from this judge. Metro would not be able to ban them unilaterally on their own. Go ahead.
It's a restraining order for a location instead of for a person.
Yeah. And so when you look at this, the Metro public transportation cannot. With the woman that dumped the urine, she was ultimately banned from the bus that she poured it on, but she could still ride anything else. Anything else. Philly Computers, do y'all remember that one from last week?
It's when the Philadelphia gave out.
Yeah, that was just for Monday, yeah.
2,000 computers to students.
They gave out a lot of computers.
And they didn't tell anyone about the cameras.
Mm-hmm.
They were spying on them without the computers actually being stolen or not.
The idea was that they had cameras set up on these things so that if they were reported as stolen, they could activate the cameras and they could get an idea of who had it or maybe where it was. But they activated the cameras, in fact, when they weren't stolen. And what kinds of things did they get?
They found a student using or dealing drugs, I think.
Attempting to deal.
Attempting to deal, yes. Go ahead.
Oh, and
The school sued?
No.
The kids sued.
The school was sued, and they sued basically as a violation of privacy, yeah. And you notice up here was Blake Robbins. There was a second kid in a smaller suit. And I don't know that the article mentions this, but they had actually gotten tens of thousands of images. And it was of Blake Robbins in bed, evidently with some illegal narcotics. And so they had evidence that he had it. And then when they went through his history of use of the computer, they found out that he was trying to sell. Ultimately, they attempted to address this with him in school. Well, this didn't seem like this was the right way to go. He sued. Did he win?
Yes.
How much did he win?
$100,000.
Most of it went to the.
It was over $600,000 as far as the settlement. It was $175,000 that he got, $10,000 that the other guy got, and then the remainder of that taking it. I think it was like $425,000 ultimately went to the attorneys. So the attorneys were the ones that really made out. And then of course today, Alec yelling and causing so much shenanigan back there. If you remember with today's article dealing with the voting and allowing or not allowing of non-citizens. And then I also put up the thing dealing with automatic voter registration. So that kind of covers it. And don't forget the links, because you will see in there that there are some links, some video links, and oftentimes these parallel with articles. Don't forget the Equal Rights Amendment, because we had talked about that one. You remember the state that's the last state that might pass so that there would actually be 3/4 of the federal states to approve the Equal Rights Amendment? Virginia, it doesn't look like it's really going to happen, but Virginia is considering it. But if you remember, a number of other states in recent years passed it. The Equal Rights Amendment has expired, so it legally cannot become law even if Virginia does. But it's just the idea that since this movement is going, maybe they'll reintroduce it, but they would have to start over from the beginning. Talked about ERA ratification. Those two kind of tie in together. Alienation of affection. Do you remember that one? Go ahead.
This was when it was in North Carolina.
It was the North Carolina law.
But if you commit adultery in North Carolina, the spouse that is being cheated on can sue you for stealing their spouse's love.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Keon got mad about this article, and he really didn't want to talk about it. I'm not sure why. But understand, if there are a series of states, and there's not many, there's about 7, I think it's 7, that ultimately have alienation of affection laws. If somebody cheats on you, your spouse cheats on you, you can sue them for divorce, and ultimately, though, you're kind of suing yourself because y'all are going to split up the property. But under alienation of affection, you can sue the person that cheated on your spouse. And oftentimes what ends up happening in these things is you can get some serious money by suing the person that cheated on your spouse, to your point, because they stole the love. A marriage is a contract in a less romantic and more formal way, and stealing the love means they broke the contract with your spouse. And if you remember, I had asked you, how much is that person worth? And y'all really struggled giving me a dollar amount. Some people even said that person would be worthless if they cheated on me. But if you're suing for damages, you have to put a value on the love. And it's not just like, okay, we were married for 10 years and had 2 kids together. But if we get married till death do us part, that means that not only did I put in these 10 years, but I may have lost 20 or 30 years as a result of the divorce. And then when you start multiplying this out, that number can get crazy high. So just to make sure you're clear on this, if you have an affair with a North Carolina resident in North Carolina, this law could impact you.
Also, if it's outside of North Carolina.
If it's outside. So if somebody from North Carolina comes up here and has an affair with you, that ultimately could be covered by this law. And then the last piece on this in dealing with it is if 2 of you met in a 3rd state that is not North Carolina and ultimately had this affair, then again, you could be held liable. So it's not just in North Carolina or even with a North Carolinian here, but you have to make sure wherever you go, you need to make sure about this, because just because you didn't know they're married is not necessarily, that's a hard thing to prove. Let's put it that way, and that would be your best defense, but it's very hard to prove. I'll go ahead and stop there. Anybody with any other thoughts about anything at all? There's going to be some really good questions from these multiple choices, these articles. I promise you that. It'll probably be 6 out of 9. It'll probably be maybe 30 multiple choice questions and then 6 out of 9 short answers. So it'll probably be about a 90-point exam. Okay? Good luck, y'all.